The notice taped to my front door was printed on HOA letterhead with bold red letters that read, "Cease and desist immediately." And I felt my blood pressure spike before I even finished reading the first line. I had lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Gilbert, Arizona, for 3 years without a single problem, paid my dues on time, kept my lawn pristine, and never once violated the covenants and restrictions that governed our planned community. Yet here I was, being ordered to stop the attic insulation work I had started just 2 days ago, because apparently my effort to reduce my energy bills had somehow become a threat to community standards. I am Tyler Winters, a mechanical engineer who works remotely for a renewable energy company, and I take energy efficiency seriously. Arizona summers are brutal, with temperatures regularly hitting 115 degrees, and my electric bills had been astronomical. After doing my research, I hired a licensed contractor to upgrade my attic insulation from the builder-grade garbage that came with the house to a proper spray foam system that would save me hundreds of dollars per month. The contractor had all the proper permits from the town of Gilbert. The work was being done entirely inside my home where nobody could even see it. And yet, somehow the HOA had decided this was their business. The notice was signed by Karren Thornton, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board, and it cited some vague provision about modifications requiring prior approval, even though the covenants and restrictions clearly stated that internal modifications not visible from the street did not require board approval. I had read those documents cover to cover before buying my house specifically because I did not want to deal with HOA nonsense. I pulled out my phone and called the contractor, Mike, who was scheduled to return the next morning to finish the job. "Hey Tyler, what's up?" Mike answered cheerfully. "I just got a cease and desist notice from my HOA," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "They're saying I can't do the insulation work." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you serious? We've got all the permits from the town. The work is entirely internal. They have no jurisdiction over this." That's what I thought too, but apparently Karren Thornton thinks differently. "Karren Thornton," Mike's tone changed. "Oh man, I've heard about her. She's president of like 3 different HOAs in the East Valley. Total power tripper. Last year she tried to fine someone for having the wrong shade of beige on their garage door. What should I do? Honestly, keep going. You're not violating any actual laws or legitimate HOA rules. If she wants to push it, let her try. I'll be there tomorrow morning at 8 to finish up." After hanging up with Mike, I decided to call Karren directly. The HOA directory listed her cell phone number, and I figured a reasonable conversation might clear this up. The phone rang 4 times before a clipped, nasal voice answered. "This is Karren." "Hi Karren, this is Tyler Winters from 2847 Sagaro Lane. I just got your notice about my insulation work, and I wanted to discuss it with you, because I think there might be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Winters. You are conducting unauthorized modification work on your property without board approval. But the work is entirely internal," I explained patiently. "The covenants clearly state that internal modifications not visible from outside the home don't require approval. Any work that requires a contractor requires approval. It's in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Supplemental Guidelines." I felt my jaw clench. I don't recall receiving any supplemental guidelines. The only documents I received at closing were the original covenants and restrictions from 2019. The supplemental guidelines were approved at the annual meeting last year. All homeowners were notified. I didn't receive any notification. That's not my problem, Mr. Winters. The guidelines are in effect whether you received them or not. You need to stop the work immediately or face daily fines of $500. $500. That's excessive and probably not even legal. The board has full authority to set fine amounts. If you don't comply, we can place a lien on your property. My hands were shaking with anger now. Karren, I have all the proper permits from the town. This work is legal and it's inside my own home. You have no right to stop it. We'll see about that, Mr. Winters. She hung up without another word. I spent the rest of the evening researching Arizona HOA law and discovered that Karren was absolutely wrong. State law clearly limits HOA authority over internal modifications, and any supplemental guidelines have to be provided to homeowners through proper channels with adequate notice. Even if her guidelines were legitimate, the fines she was threatening were way beyond the legal limits set by Arizona revised statutes. The next morning at 8 sharp, Mike's truck pulled into my driveway. I met him at the door and explained my conversation with Karren. "Let's just get it done," Mike said. "She can complain all she wants, but we're not breaking any laws." Mike and his crew spent the day finishing the spray foam installation in my attic. It was satisfying to watch the thick coating of insulation cover every surface, sealing all the gaps where my expensive air conditioning had been escaping into the scorching Arizona heat. By 4 in the afternoon, they were packing up their equipment, and I was writing the final check. "You should notice a difference in your temperatures within a few hours," Mike said as he handed me the final paperwork. "And your next electric bill is going to make you very happy." He was right. That night, even though it was 108 degrees outside, my air conditioning seemed to run half as often. The house stayed comfortable at 75 degrees instead of the constant struggle to maintain 78. I actually had to put on a light jacket while watching television because it got too cool in the living room. 2 days later, another notice appeared on my door. This one was even more aggressive, informing me that I was being fined $500 per day retroactive to the start of my insulation work, totaling $3,000 so far. It also stated that the board was voting to place a lien on my property if I did not immediately pay the fines and remove the unauthorized insulation. Remove the insulation. They wanted me to tear out the spray foam that had just been professionally installed. I immediately drafted a detailed response letter citing specific Arizona statutes, the original covenants and restrictions, and the lack of proper notice regarding any supplemental guidelines. I explained that the work was legally permitted, entirely internal, and outside the scope of HOA authority. I delivered the letter personally to Karren's house, which was 6 streets over in the same development. Karren's house was immaculate in that sterile, staged way that suggested no actual living happened there. Her lawn was golf course perfect, her driveway looked freshly sealed, and her home's exterior was painted in precisely the approved shade of desert sand from the HOA color palette. I rang the doorbell and heard footsteps approaching. Karren opened the door with an expression of annoyance that seemed permanently etched on her face. She was probably in her early 50s, with severely styled blonde hair and enough jewelry to suggest she took her HOA presidency very seriously. She looked at me like I was a door-to-door salesman. "Mr. Winters, what are you doing at my home?" I wanted to deliver this response letter personally and hopefully resolve this situation before it escalates further. I held out the envelope. She took it without looking at it. "There's nothing to resolve. You violated the guidelines, you owe the fines, and you need to remove the unauthorized modifications. Karren, with all due respect, I have not violated any legitimate rule. The work was internal, properly permitted and outside your authority. I'm asking you to drop this. I don't think you understand how HOAs work, Mr. Winters. The board has authority to maintain property values and community standards. Your little project sets a precedent that other homeowners can just do whatever they want without oversight. My little project. It's attic insulation. Nobody can even see it. How does it affect property values or community standards? Karren's expression hardened. I've been HOA president for 7 years across multiple communities. I know what happens when you let homeowners run wild with modifications. First it's insulation, then it's unpermitted room additions, then it's people turning their homes into rental properties or running businesses out of their garages. I maintain order, and that's what keeps property values high. This is completely different from those things, and you know it. The board meeting is next Tuesday at 7. You can present your case there. Until then, the fines stand. She closed the door in my face. I drove home furious but determined. If Karren wanted to play hardball, I could too. I spent the next few days documenting everything, gathering my permits, printing out the relevant statutes, and preparing a presentation for the board meeting. I also posted about the situation in a local Gilbert community Facebook group, asking if anyone else had dealt with similar HOA overreach. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people shared horror stories about Karren Thornton and her reign of terror across multiple HOAs. Apparently, her tactics included showing up at people's homes unannounced to inspect for violations, using binoculars to spy on backyards, and allegedly falsifying violation notices to levy fines. One person claimed she had been removed from an HOA board in Mesa 3 years ago for financial improprieties, but had never faced any real consequences. More importantly, several neighbors from Meadowbrook Estates reached out privately to say they supported me and were sick of Karren's dictatorial behavior. One neighbor, David, said he had been fined $1,500 last year for planting the wrong type of desert landscaping, even though his plants were all native species approved by the town's water conservation guidelines. Tuesday evening arrived and I drove to the Meadowbrook Estates Community Clubhouse, where board meetings were held. The clubhouse was a small building near the neighborhood entrance, with a meeting room that could hold maybe 40 people. I arrived 15 minutes early and was surprised to find the room already half full. Many of the faces were people who had responded to my Facebook post. Karren sat at a table at the front of the room with 4 other board members, all of whom looked significantly less enthusiastic about being there than she did. She noticed me immediately, and her expression soured. "Mr. Winters, I see you've decided to make a spectacle of this." "I invited some neighbors who were interested in the discussion," I said calmly. "This is a public meeting, right?" "Of course it is," said one of the other board members, a middle-aged man whose name tag read Robert Chen, Vice President. The meeting started with routine business, approval of last month's minutes, a financial report, and discussion of some landscaping issues in the common areas. Finally, Karren turned to my issue. "Next on the agenda, we have the matter of Tyler Winters and his unauthorized modification work. Mr. Winters, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood up and walked to the front of the room with my documents. For the next 5 minutes, I laid out my argument clearly and methodically. I showed the town permits, cited the specific covenants and restrictions that limited HOA authority over internal modifications, quoted Arizona statutes that protected homeowners from excessive fines and overreach, and explained that I had never received proper notice of any supplemental guidelines. "The bottom line," I concluded, "is that this work was legal, proper, and outside the scope of HOA authority. The fines being levied are excessive and not supported by law or by our community's governing documents. I'm asking the board to drop this matter entirely." Several neighbors applauded when I sat down. Karren's face had turned an impressive shade of red. "Thank you, Mr. Winters. The board will now discuss the matter." But before Karren could continue, Robert Chen spoke up. "Actually, Karren, I'd like to ask a question. I've reviewed the documents Tyler sent to the board, and I have to say, I'm not clear on our authority here. The original covenants do seem to limit our jurisdiction over internal modifications. The supplemental guidelines expanded our authority," Karren snapped. "But I don't remember voting on any supplemental guidelines," said another board member, a woman named Patricia Lopez. "When were these approved?" Karren shifted uncomfortably. "They were approved at last year's annual meeting by homeowner vote." "I was at that meeting," David called out from the audience. "There was no vote on supplemental guidelines." Other voices murmured agreement. Karren's face was now approaching purple. "The vote was conducted by written ballot," Karren insisted. "Then where are the ballots?" Robert asked. "We should have records of that vote. The ballots were counted and discarded per normal procedure." "Karren, our bylaws require retention of all ballots for 7 years," Patricia said quietly. "I'm the secretary. I would have been responsible for storing them." "There are no ballots because there was no vote." The room erupted in conversation. Karren banged a gavel on the table, a gavel I was pretty sure had no official purpose since this was not a courtroom. "Order. This meeting will come to order." Robert stood up. "Karren, I'm making a motion that we drop all fines against Tyler Winters and formally recognize that internal home modifications do not require board approval per our original covenants and restrictions." "I second that motion," Patricia said immediately. "You can't just circumvent the president like this," Karren sputtered. "Actually, we can," Robert said. "That's how boards work. All in favor." 3 hands went up immediately. The fourth board member, an older man who had not said anything all night, hesitated and then raised his hand too. "Motion passes 4-1, Robert announced. "Tyler, you owe nothing and you can keep your insulation." The room applauded. Karren gathered her papers and stormed out of the meeting without another word. Patricia looked embarrassed as she tried to continue with the rest of the agenda. "I thought that would be the end of it, but I was very wrong. 3 days later, I got a call from my next-door neighbor, Susan, at 7 in the morning. 'Tyler, you need to see this.' I walked outside in my pajamas and saw what she meant. Someone had spray-painted HOA violator in large red letters across my garage door. My mailbox had been knocked over and damaged. The new desert willow tree I had planted in my front yard had been partially uprooted, its root ball exposed to the brutal morning sun. I immediately called the Gilbert Police Department and filed a report. The responding officer, a young guy named Officer Martinez, took photos and notes. "You have any security cameras?" he asked. "Not yet, but I'm definitely getting some installed today." "Any idea who might have done this?" I explained the situation with Karren and the HOA. Officer Martinez nodded knowingly. "We've had issues with that HOA before. Nothing we could prove, but several complaints about aggressive enforcement tactics. I'll file this report and increase patrols in the area." "I'd definitely get those cameras up as soon as possible." I spent the morning cleaning spray paint off my garage door, replanting my tree, and ordering a Ring doorbell camera and 2 additional security cameras for the side yards. Susan and David both came over to express their support and disgust at what had happened. "Karren's losing it," David said. "She's ruled these HOAs like her personal fiefdom for years, and now people are finally pushing back." "You think she did this herself?" I asked. "Maybe, or maybe she has some loyal follower who did it for her. Either way, she's responsible. The cameras arrived the next day with expedited shipping, and I installed them immediately. They had motion detection, night vision, and cloud storage of all footage. I felt a little paranoid but also relieved to have them. 4 nights later, at 2:30 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the side yard camera. I pulled up the app and watched in real time as a figure dressed in dark clothes crept along the side of my house toward my air conditioning unit. I could not see the person's face, but I could see they were carrying something. I dialed 911 immediately. "Gilbert Police, what's your emergency?" "Someone is trespassing in my yard right now. I have them on security camera. They're by my air conditioning unit." The dispatcher kept me on the line while officers were dispatched. I continued watching the camera feed. The figure was doing something to my AC unit, using some kind of tool. It took less than 2 minutes for me to hear sirens approaching. The figure heard them too and tried to run, but they were cornered between my house and the 6-foot block wall that separated my property from the neighbor behind me. 2 Gilbert police officers came around both sides of the house with flashlights. "Police, stay where you are and show us your hands." The figure froze and raised their hands. As the officers approached, one of them pulled back the figure's dark hood, and I saw through my camera feed exactly what I had suspected. It was Karren Thornton. I went outside and met the officers in my side yard. Karren was already in handcuffs, and one of the officers was examining my air conditioning unit with a flashlight. "Mr. Winters." "Officer Garcia, we spoke on the phone. Can you confirm you don't know this person or give them permission to be on your property?" "I know her. She's the HOA president, but she absolutely does not have permission to be here." Officer Garcia's partner, Officer Mitchell, was holding up a pair of wire cutters. "Looks like she cut through multiple wires in your AC unit. This is going to be expensive to repair." I looked at Karren. Even in handcuffs with her usually perfect hair disheveled, she maintained a defiant expression. "I was checking for code violations," she said. "As HOA president, I have the authority to inspect properties. At 2:30 in the morning by sneaking into someone's yard and cutting wires." Officer Garcia said skeptically, "Madam, you're being arrested for criminal trespassing and criminal damage. You have the right to remain silent." As they read her Miranda rights, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This woman had let her power trip turn her into an actual criminal. The officers asked me to email them the full security footage, which I did immediately. They also asked if I wanted to press charges, and I said absolutely yes. They loaded Karren into the patrol car and drove away. I did not sleep the rest of the night. Instead, I called an HVAC company and scheduled an emergency repair for first thing in the morning. The damage was extensive. Karren had cut through the main power supply lines, the control wiring, and even punctured the refrigerant lines. The repair cost was over $4,000. The story exploded across local social media within 24 hours. Apparently, someone had a police scanner and heard the incident, and combined with all the previous drama, it became the talk of Gilbert's neighborhood groups. The local news even picked it up. HOA president arrested for vandalizing homeowner's property in ongoing dispute. Karren was released on bond the next day, but the damage to her reputation was catastrophic. Within a week, all 3 of the HOA boards she presided over had called emergency meetings and voted to remove her. The Meadowbrook Estates Board issued a formal apology to me and several other homeowners who had been victimized by Karren's overreach. Robert Chen became the new president and immediately set about reforming how the HOA operated. They rescinded the phantom supplemental guidelines, established clear limits on board authority, and created an appeals process for homeowners who felt they had been unfairly treated. But Karren was not done causing problems. 2 weeks after her arrest, I received a summons. She was suing me in civil court for defamation, claiming that I had orchestrated a campaign to destroy her reputation and cost her positions in multiple organizations. She was seeking $250,000 in damages. I immediately hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Andrea Foster who specialized in HOA disputes and civil litigation. After reviewing everything, she actually laughed. "This is a slap suit," Andrea explained. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. She's trying to punish you for speaking out and intimidate you into dropping the criminal charges. But Arizona has strong anti-slap laws. We can get this dismissed pretty quickly and probably get attorney's fees." Andrea was right. She filed a motion to dismiss under Arizona's anti-slap statute, arguing that my statements were all true and protected speech, and that Karren's lawsuit was frivolous retaliation. The judge agreed and dismissed the case within 6 weeks, ordering Karren to pay my attorney's fees of $12,000. The criminal case moved forward too. Karren's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county attorney's office was not interested in going easy. She had been caught on camera, the damage was extensive, and she had a pattern of similar behavior even if previous incidents could not be proven. In August, 5 months after her arrest, Karren Thornton stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to criminal damage, a Class 4 felony, and criminal trespassing, a Class 3 misdemeanor. The judge sentenced her to 3 years of probation, ordered her to pay full restitution for my AC repair, plus additional damages for the vandalism to my garage and mailbox, and mandated anger management counseling. "Miss Thornton," the judge said sternly, "you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust repeatedly. You let your desire for control override your judgment and the law. You're lucky the prosecutor agreed to probation instead of jail time. I hope you use this opportunity to reflect on your actions and make better choices." Karren's face was blank as she accepted the sentence. I felt no satisfaction, just relief that it was finally over. My life returned to normal after that. The new HOA board under Robert's leadership was reasonable and responsive. They focused on actual community issues like maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable standards, not petty tyranny. Several other homeowners who had been victimized by Karren's regime came forward with their own stories, and the board worked to resolve those situations fairly. The insulation work that started this whole mess continued to exceed my expectations. My electric bills dropped by over 60% compared to the previous summer. In June, when temperatures hit 118 degrees, my house stayed comfortable and my AC ran efficiently. I calculated that the insulation would pay for itself in energy savings within 3 years, and meanwhile, I was living in significantly more comfort. I ran into Karren one time after everything was resolved, in the produce section at the Safeway on Baseline Road. She looked older and more tired than I remembered. She saw me, our eyes met briefly, and then she quickly turned and walked away. I felt a pang of something, maybe pity, but mostly I just felt grateful the whole ordeal was over. David and Susan became good friends of mine after everything. We had a shared bond from surviving the Karren Thornton era, and we often joked about it over backyard barbecues. Other neighbors who had been afraid to speak up during Karren's reign felt empowered to participate in HOA meetings and community decisions. The story became something of a legend in Gilbert's HOA communities. I heard from people in other neighborhoods dealing with their own petty tyrants who were inspired to push back against overreach. Several HOA reform groups formed across the East Valley, advocating for transparency, reasonable enforcement, and respect for homeowner rights. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I could have handled the situation differently, maybe avoided the escalation and confrontation. But then, I remember Karren's face when she insisted I remove perfectly good insulation from my house, her refusal to acknowledge any limits on her authority, and her decision to vandalize my property in the middle of the night. Some people need to face consequences before they change, and some never change at all. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, the importance of documentation, and the reality that most bullies, even adult bullies in positions of petty power, are fundamentally cowards. Karren talked tough when she thought she was untouchable, but she crumbled when faced with actual accountability. It also taught me about community. The support I received from neighbors, both people I knew and complete strangers who just believed in doing the right thing, was remarkable. The Facebook posts, the people who showed up to the board meeting, the neighbors who brought me food and support during the stress, all of it mattered. Nobody fights these battles alone, even when it feels that way. As summer turned to fall and the Arizona heat finally broke, I spent a lot of time in my comfortably cool house, enjoying the fruits of that insulation work that caused so much trouble. Every time my AC kicked on and ran for just a few minutes before shutting off again, I smiled. Every time I opened my drastically reduced electric bill, I felt vindicated. The new HOA board worked out well. Robert proved to be a fair and sensible president who actually cared about the community rather than control. They updated the community documents to be clearer about the limits of HOA authority, established term limits for board positions to prevent anyone from accumulating too much power, and created a homeowner bill of rights that was posted in the clubhouse and on the community website. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates actually increased after Karren's departure, which I found ironic given her constant claims that her strict enforcement was necessary to maintain values. Turns out people are willing to pay more to live in a community that is not run by a tyrant. I kept the security cameras up even after the criminal case concluded. They gave me peace of mind and actually came in handy one more time when they caught a package thief who had been hitting the neighborhood. I shared that footage with police, and they were able to catch the person within a week. The cameras became something of a neighborhood asset, and several other homeowners installed similar systems. Andrea, my lawyer, and I stayed in touch. She told me that my case had become a teaching example in her practice for how to handle HOA overreach. She used the story, with my permission, when educating other homeowners about their rights and the importance of knowing the law rather than just accepting what an HOA board claims. The story also led to some actual change at the state level. A state representative from Gilbert, after hearing about my case and many others like it, introduced legislation to strengthen homeowner protections against HOA overreach. The bill, which passed the following year, required HOAs to provide clear notice of any rule changes, limited fine amounts to reasonable levels, and established a streamlined arbitration process for disputes. It was not perfect, but it was progress. I testified at one of the legislative committee hearings about the bill, sharing my experience and advocating for reasonable oversight of HOA power. It was surreal to be sitting in a hearing room at the Arizona State Capitol in Phoenix, talking to elected officials about attic insulation and Karren Thornton's vendetta. But it felt important, like maybe something good could come from all the stress and conflict. One of the other people who testified at that hearing was a woman from Scottsdale who had been fined $20,000 by her HOA for installing solar panels, even though state law explicitly protected homeowners' right to install solar. Her story made mine seem almost quaint by comparison, but the pattern was clear. HOAs across Arizona had been operating with too much power and too little accountability for too long. The bill passed with bipartisan support, which was rare in the often divided Arizona legislature. Even lawmakers who generally opposed regulation recognized that HOAs had become a problem that needed addressing. The governor signed it in a ceremony where several homeowners, including me, were invited to attend. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, life settled into a pleasant rhythm. The neighborhood felt different without Karren's constant surveillance and enforcement. People relaxed. They planted the gardens they wanted, painted their front doors in approved but previously discouraged colors, and generally enjoyed their homes without fear. The neighborhood did not descend into chaos, as Karren had predicted. If anything, it became more vibrant and welcoming. I ended up serving on the HOA board myself for a 2-year term, more out of a sense of responsibility than any desire for the position. I wanted to help ensure that the reforms Robert started continued, and that we never went back to the bad old days. It was occasionally frustrating and tedious, dealing with disputes over barking dogs and fence repairs, but it was also satisfying to be part of something constructive. During my time on the board, we implemented several new initiatives. We created a community garden in one of the common areas where residents could grow vegetables. We organized regular social events to build neighborhood connections. We established a community email list for sharing information about everything from garage sales to coyote sightings. None of it was revolutionary, but all of it made Meadowbrook Estates feel more like an actual community, rather than just a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. The insulation continued to perform beautifully through multiple summers and winters. I became something of an evangelist for proper home insulation, and I helped several neighbors evaluate their own situations and find good contractors. Mike, the contractor who did my original work, got so many referrals from my neighborhood that he actually sent me a thank you gift. A very nice cooler with his company logo. I never heard directly from Karren again after that brief encounter at the grocery store. Through the neighborhood grapevine, I learned that she had moved to New Mexico about a year after her conviction, presumably to start fresh somewhere her reputation had not preceded her. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, but I honestly did not spend much time thinking about it. She had been a problem in my life for a few intense months, but she did not get to occupy space in my head forever. The house itself continued to be a source of satisfaction. Beyond the insulation, I made other improvements over the years, always careful to understand what did and did not require HOA approval. I renovated the kitchen, updated the bathrooms, and converted the unused formal dining room into a home office. Each project made the house more perfectly suited to my needs and more comfortable. I even started dating someone, Lisa, who I met at one of the neighborhood social events the reformed HOA board organized. She had moved to Meadowbrook Estates just after the Karren era ended and could not believe the stories we all told about what it had been like. She was smart, funny, and completely uninterested in HOA drama, which made her perfect in my book. Lisa and I spent many evenings on my back patio, enjoying the cool comfort of a house with proper insulation even during Phoenix's brutal summers. We talked about everything from work to travel to eventually, maybe, what our future might look like together. The patio became one of my favorite places, a peaceful refuge where the stress of the HOA battle felt very far away. Looking back now, several years removed from those intense months of conflict, I can see the whole experience more clearly. Yes, it was stressful and frustrating and at times scary. Yes, it cost me money and time and emotional energy. But it also taught me that I was capable of standing up for myself, that communities can change when people demand better, and that the rules protecting homeowners exist for a reason. I learned that most people, even in HOA boards, are reasonable when you deal with them reasonably. Karren was an aberration, a cautionary tale of what happens when someone prioritizes control over community. But Robert, Patricia, and the other board members who stood up during that crucial meeting were the norm. Decent people trying to do right by their neighbors. I also learned the value of documentation and preparation. The permits I obtained, the research I did on HOA law, the careful records I kept, and the security cameras I installed all proved essential. If I had not been meticulous about documenting everything, Karren might have won, or at least dragged out the conflict far longer. Most importantly, I learned that your home really is your castle, but only if you are willing to defend it. The protections that homeowners have under Arizona law exist because people fought for them over the years. By standing up to Karren and the overreaching HOA board, I was part of that tradition of people refusing to be pushed around in their own homes. The insulation that started everything continued to save me money and keep me comfortable year after year. Every time summer rolled around and my neighbors complained about their electric bills while mine stayed reasonable, I remembered why I had fought so hard. It was not just about the money or even the comfort, though both of those mattered. It was about the principle that I had the right to improve my own home in legal and reasonable ways without being subjected to arbitrary authority. The incident also made me more engaged in local politics and community affairs. I voted in every election, even the small ones for town council and school board. I paid attention to proposed changes in HOA law and contacted my representatives when issues arose. I learned that democracy, even at the neighborhood level, requires participation, or else petty tyrants like Karren will fill the vacuum. Years after the dust settled, I sometimes drove past Karren's old house in Meadowbrook Estates. New owners had moved in and painted the front door a cheerful turquoise, one of the approved colors that Karren never allowed people to use because she thought it was too bold. Every time I saw that turquoise door, I smiled. It was a small thing, but it represented freedom from the regime of fear and petness that Karren had maintained. The story of my battle with the HOA became something I occasionally shared at parties or gatherings when the conversation turned to homeowner horror stories. It always got reactions, usually shock that someone would actually vandalize property over insulation, followed by appreciation that I had stood up to it. More than once, someone told me later that my story inspired them to push back against their own HOA's unreasonable demands. I stayed in touch with several of the neighbors who had supported me during the conflict. David became a good friend, who I could call for advice on everything from home repairs to relationship questions. Susan and her husband became regular dinner companions. We formed a bond that went beyond just being neighbors. We were people who had stood together when it mattered. The reformed HOA continued to function well under various board members over the years. We had the occasional dispute or difficult decision, but nothing ever approached the dysfunction of the Karren era. The term limits prevented anyone from accumulating too much power, and the culture of the community had shifted toward transparency and reasonableness. My career continued to thrive as well. Working remotely in a comfortable home office in a properly insulated house made a huge difference in my productivity and job satisfaction. I eventually got promoted to a senior engineering position, leading a team developing new renewable energy technologies. The same analytical skills that helped me fight the HOA served me well in my professional life. Lisa and I got engaged in the spring, with me proposing on that back patio where we had spent so many evenings together. We planned a wedding for the following fall, to be held in the Meadowbrook Estates clubhouse with our neighbors in attendance. It felt right to celebrate in the community that had supported me through one of the most difficult periods of my life. The clubhouse had changed a lot since those contentious board meetings during the Karren era. The new board had updated the furniture, added better lighting, and created a welcoming space that residents actually wanted to use. It hosted everything from birthday parties to book clubs to yoga classes. It had become the heart of the community, rather than just a place where people got yelled at for violations. Planning the wedding made me reflect on how much had changed since I first moved into the house 6 years earlier. I had gone from being a quiet homeowner who just wanted to keep his head down to someone who had battled an HOA president, testified before the state legislature, and become an active part of improving his community. Life had a funny way of pushing you into roles you never expected. As our wedding day approached, Lisa and I worked on combining our households and planning our future together. She sold her apartment in Temp and moved into my house, which was now our house. We talked about maybe adding on a room or two in a few years when we were ready to start a family. And thanks to the reforms the HOA had implemented, I knew that any reasonable addition would be approved without drama. The wedding itself was perfect. A beautiful fall evening with temperatures in the low 80s and a gentle breeze. Our neighbors attended alongside our families and friends, filling the clubhouse with joy and celebration. Robert, who had become a good friend over the years, gave a toast about community and standing up for what is right, which got a knowing laugh from everyone who remembered the HOA battle. During the reception, I found myself standing outside the clubhouse, looking at the neighborhood where so much had happened. I thought about that first notice taped to my door, the confrontations, the vandalism, the arrest, and everything that followed. It all seemed surreal now, like it had happened to someone else. But it had happened to me, and I had survived it, learned from it, and ultimately helped make things better. The insulation that caused all the trouble was still there in my attic, still saving energy, still keeping the house comfortable. It had been worth fighting for, just like the principle of homeowner rights had been worth defending. Lisa came out and found me lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" "Just reflecting on the journey," I said, putting my arm around her. "About how something as simple as wanting better insulation turned into this whole thing that changed the community." She laughed. "Only you could turn home improvement into a civil rights crusade." "I did not mean to," I protested. "I just wanted to lower my electric bill." "And you did. And you took down a tyrant. And you helped pass a law, not bad for an engineer who just wanted better insulation." We went back inside to rejoin our celebration, but her words stayed with me. Sometimes standing up for something small and personal can lead to changes that affect many people. Sometimes doing the right thing, even when it is hard, ripples out in ways you never expected. The music played, our friends and family danced, and I felt profoundly grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts. Without the conflict with Karren and the HOA, I might never have become as engaged in my community, never have met so many of the wonderful people in my neighborhood, and maybe never have been in the right place at the right time to meet Lisa. That night, After the wedding and the reception and saying goodbye to all our guests, Lisa and I returned to our comfortable, properly insulated home. The house that had been at the center of so much conflict now represented peace, comfort, and a future we would build together. I never regretted installing that insulation, fighting that fight, or standing up to Karren Thornton and her overreaching HOA board. It had been the right thing to do, and it had led to good outcomes not just for me but for many people in my community and across Arizona. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not over grand principles, but over simple things like the right to improve your own home. And sometimes, those battles are exactly the ones worth fighting.